Josh Neighbors, College Countdown Podcast, joins us now. And Josh, you did a solely Big 12 show for a very long time. And I know that that will give you certain feelings about things or biases or whatever, but I've always found you to be a pretty measured guy when it comes to who you pick on. But what do you think it is about the Big 12 that disgusts the playoff committee so much?
I think it's the idea that all the teams were pretty even and they weren't at the caliber of the SEC. And I think to some extent that is true. But I think that the preference is always going to go to the big brands. And I think that we saw that play out this year.
Well, so, it's not just the SEC, it's the Big Ten too. And they have a non-big brand in there that just happens to be a Big Ten team. But they don't play this week, and they just get to sit pretty, is where the Big 12 and the ACC have to white-knuckle this thing out.
Yeah, well, I think particularly the ACC should be more upset, because I thought the Miami versus Alabama argument would be a bit more of a robust one. I don't think we got much of that playing out. We got a whole lot more people upset about South Carolina and Ole Miss not getting respect than we did about Miami. And I think Miami, aesthetically, because we're arguing over 11 versus 12, right, with the Miami versus Alabama thing. Where was the argument that Miami's more fun to watch and all of their games were close? Because this past month we saw Alabama get absolutely waxed by Oklahoma, 6-6 team. And I know Miami's resume is not as good. They didn't get as many opportunities, but they still have good wins on there. And they lost 2 games by a combined 9 points. So I thought there should have been a bit more consideration for the Canes than there was. And it was mostly just Ole Miss defensive line and South Carolina's playing well. And I'm where's the fight for Miami? And I thought Tom Fornelli on Cover 3 made a good point. He said that he thought Miami would either be ahead of all the SEC schools or behind all the SEC schools. And they're splitting the 9-3 SEC schools. And I actually thought it was a pretty interesting point. And they had a Miami splitting them, which I thought was interesting. I'm not sure if you felt the same way.
Yeah, I do. I think it's very, I think everybody who's playing this week should be ranked ahead of everybody who's not. That's kind of how I feel. You're in the championship game, you should get some credit for that, but it doesn't seem to be that beneficial. I don't know. It's just, again, trying to figure out this committee is really, really hard. The last 2 years in particular have been, all right, let's see if there's is there an actual agenda here? And no, there's no agenda. And then you see several separate agendas that have all been enacted. And you're well,
yeah, kind of a big picture thing. And I learned this year on the radio show I worked on. We were predicting what Arkansas's record would be. And I said, hey, 6-6 would be a pretty big accomplishment for them. Then you get to 6-6 and you watch how it happens. And you're no, it's not that big of an accomplishment, because they should have been better and they lost a bunch of really close games. And you kind of understand how you feel about records and how you achieve records. And I don't mean to be way, way, way too big picture, but I'll be honest, the College Football Playoff Committee is kind of a journey in self-exploration. And so while we're trying to figure out what their criteria are, I think they're also trying to figure out what their criteria are, right? They're all how do I feel about wins and losses and life itself? That's kind of how it appears to me now. And not there's anything wrong with that, but I think the more time that we spend trying to figure out, hey, what is their criteria, which we should try and do, because I think that'll impact scheduling down the line, and it'll impact how many conference games teams want to have and conferences want to have, and what kind of non-conference games they schedule and when they schedule them. So I don't think it's a wrong question to have, but I do think it's kind of almost this for the committee, because it rotates and changes. Is it not a journey in self-exploration, into how you feel about wins and losses?
Yeah, I am very curious if they continue on this path, which if there's not a fourth SEC team in here, Greg Sankey is going to scream bloody murder. Absolute bloody murder on that, which I think they should let him. And then he's going to say, well, this has got to be changed and blah, 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 all of these different things. But The real curious thing is whenever you get a bunch of people with separate agendas in a room and then two of them are kind of controlling it together, but then you turn those two against each other, that's where it's going to be interesting to me when it comes down to the Big Ten versus the SEC. Like one of them has to be the sacrificial lamb and they don't want it. Like they're then fighting with each other. That's what I'm looking forward to because it will happen.
Yeah, it's going to happen at some point, right? I mean, we just got it. We lost it this year because the Big Ten was just so top heavy. And Indiana won enough games and won enough games by a big margin that, their one loss, they were able to absorb. I think actually a lot of the same can be said for Penn State, right? Mm-hmm. Penn State won Penn State's toughest game. They end up losing because they can't score. But everybody else, they just kind of annihilated, and that they need to be in for that. And so, yeah, I mean, we're going to see the Big Ten get Ohio State, get Penn State, get Oregon. Oregon's deserving of being obviously number one. I actually think you could argue even with a loss, Oregon might deserve to be number one. But yeah, I mean, I think the Big Ten, just because it was so top heavy, like there was none of this cannibalization argument. It's like, wow. What are you going to do when you play Nebraska? Then you play Iowa. And nobody was doing that, right? Yeah. It was like, here are the top four. It's kind of it. So, yeah, there was none of that fight. But you're right, Paul. At some point, that fight will happen.
Yeah, it absolutely will. So, Josh, let's talk about the games this week and where you see them falling. Let's start with the Big Ten and Oregon and Penn State. I don't think anybody in the world is picking Penn State in this thing.
Yeah, which honestly, how much is Oregon? I guess Oregon wants to buy and whatnot. I guess they're fighting for that. But, I would give Penn State a shot because, how motivated is Oregon? I mean, Oregon's been the best team all season. Mm-hmm. They have to prove it one more time. But also, to your point, Penn State in their biggest game, it's been the big bugaboo against James Franklin is he can't win big games. And he continually did not win big games this year. So, what would change in the Big Ten championship game? Mm-hmm. But we have to question motivations. Like James Franklin, their Penn State team. I think they beat Ole Miss last year in the bowl game. So, how motivated is Oregon? I think Penn State might see this as the chance to make some kind of a statement as they go forward in the playoff, right? The Oregon's are kind of made their statement, but Dan Lanning, I mean, he has the ultimate stomp a hole in your what. So I would favor Oregon, and also, it feels like Andy Kotelnicki has done a great job with that Penn State offense, but he's had to get super creative, not because he's a creative guy, but at Kansas you had to get more creative because you have to, and their defense wasn't very good, and so they had a lot of good offensive players, but they needed all that production. At Penn State, it's kind of the same thing. As much as Drew Hour's gotten better, that's not an awesome offense. And so he's had to be really, really good to kind of put them over the top. And I think he has been really, really good and put them over the top this year. But does that align when they play really good teams? I like to see that play out this weekend. Can Kotelnicki's offense out-scheme, out-execute what's been a fantastic Oregon defense?
All right, SEC, Texas and Georgia. These two teams played. Georgia kind of mopped the floor with Texas, even though they played really sloppy on offense. Carson Beck, that was this guy's the number one quarterback that we're talking about. What do we? The roller coaster started for him. He's been playing really well lately, including late in the game against Georgia Tech last week. Does Georgia beat them again?
No, I think Texas makes the adjustments. I really do. Yeah, I mean, Georgia, their offense has looked a lot better. Carson Beck has played a lot better, and their offensive line's gotten healthier. But Texas's defense has really kicked it into another gear these last couple of weeks in particular. You saw what they did when they played the Arkansas offense, man. It was really Arkansas, they got completely shut out. They had one nice drive the entire game. Then you saw what they did against Texas A&M. I mean, really they kicked it into another gear once again. And I think that defense, they can bring pressure from different points. They can cover really well too. They take advantage of opportunities when it's given to them. And also, I don't think Georgia's defense has played fantastic. Like you saw what Georgia Tech did to him. Man, there are points to be had. There are points to be scored against this Georgia defense. They are not like the mean pass rush machine. I mean, they're not always pass rush machine. They're a bit more patient defense. They've always relied on their physicality and their speed. It's been always Georgia's calling card, but they can't cover in space quite like other Georgia defenses have covered in space. I think Arch Manning, this could be a game where they use him some because running quarterbacks, mobile quarterbacks have given Georgia's defense a lot of problems this year. Guys have really been able to use that, dual threat quarterbacks mostly, but they need to kind of allow some passing plays to be there for Arch Manning just to give that threat of the run of the pass. But I think he could have a good game. So I'm excited to see what they can do. I'm going with Texas just because it's hard to beat a team twice. Boise State and UNLV tonight. What do you got? Barry Odom. Let's just do it. Let's do it. I want to see, as a Missouri guy, I want to see Barry Odom have that full circle moment. It's hard to learn how to be a coach in the SEC. And it didn't go well for him. And he deserved to be fired because he couldn't recruit very well. And to see him go to Arkansas and really, man, Sam Pittman, some of his best years were with Barry Odom. I know Barry Odom's defenses weren't fantastic, but it feels like maybe Barry Odom was doing a whole lot more than just coaching the defense for Sam Pittman's teams. And then he goes to UNLV and he has 2 years of success. And he's got guys like Jalen Catalon who have had that long journey with him. They had that quarterback situation flip, and all the players are like, hey, this backup quarterback's actually better than a starter. And they're at this point. And, man, they were close last time. I think they get the job done this time against Boise. I think UNLV, we talked about Ashton Genty and Boise all year, and I think it's going to end up being UNLV who's in the college football playoff and not Boise. All right, SMU versus Clemson. Who you got? I think Clemson wins. Oh, I disagree with you wholeheartedly. I think Clemson wins. I hate to say it. I don't want this to happen. I've got no desire to watch this happen, but I think you saw last week, like, Clemson was on the wrong side of a guy who I think is going to end up being I think Lenore Sellers has a chance to be probably the best South Carolina quarterback in the 21st century. Mm-hmm. And that one run that he had where he just ran straight, then ran to the left, then ran back to the right. And I'm like, oh my God, this is unbelievable. SMU doesn't have that kind of caliber of player. And Cade Klubnik, it's an experience to watch him play. I'll tell you that. I mean, it is a roller coaster ride. But I feel like that Dabo voodoo, they win the ACC all the time. And I feel like we're going to see 3-loss Clemson again. I do think it's going to be a close game. I think SMU should get in if they lose close. If they lose at all, they should be in, honestly. But yeah, I'm going to go with Clemson. Okay, finally, let's talk Big 12. Iowa State, Arizona State. This is probably the most even matchup of every single one of them. Yeah, so Iowa State, they've got 2 really good receivers, and Arizona State's passing defense is weak. And Iowa State struggles to stop the run, and Cam Scatterbo is awesome. Kenny Dillingham is a lunatic. We know Matt Campbell can also be a lunatic at times. You know what's crazy is this hasn't felt like Iowa State had a pretty quiet 10-2. It feels like, and they've accomplished stuff before. This is their first 10-win season as a program. And it almost feels like Matt Campbell's done that before, but he hasn't. Nobody's done that before. Mm-hmm. And so Matt Campbell continually accomplishes things at Iowa State that we have never seen before. So we have to, I think, acknowledge that and give him his flowers for that, because I don't feel like we are right now. I'm not sure if you feel the same way, but this is the ultimate coin flip. I'm going to go with Iowa State. Okay. Josh Neighbors, host of the College Countdown. Watch it, like it, subscribe to it, share it. Share it all over the internet. Share it like it's a cat meme. Cat memes. Like one of the, You're such a dad, Paul. You're such a dad. Yeah, and I'm not. Yeah, 44 and no. So it might not happen for me. Or maybe I have your dad age. Yeah, you can't help it. I could easily step in and take over for someone. You could. Yeah, easily, just tomorrow. All right, here you go. Yeah. I could do that. Could see it. Yeah. Josh Neighbors, College Countdown.